In a blockbuster decision, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. has blocked Donald Trump's effort to freeze federal spending and loans. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started.
Paige, this is literally breaking news, and it is a big one. A federal district court judge in the District of Columbia has issued a temporary restraining order blocking the effect of Donald Trump's effort to put a government-wide freeze on spending under grants and loans. This will have big impact for the various organizations and individuals that are counting on that money, and it is a huge loss for Donald Trump's effort to wrestle control of the federal spending power, even though Congress was not willing to put up a fight. The good folks at Democracy Forward and their nonprofit clients were. And so kudos to them and congratulations to them and the American people.
This all started a week ago when the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, issued a memo basically telling all the federal agencies to stop spending money while the Trump administration tried to root out quote unquote woke ideology, DEI, the Green New Deal, which is not a laws, it's just proposed legislation, and do all these things. And Marc, I don't want to undercut the breaking news here, but it also kind of feels like a broken record because this is what, like the third time we're saying that this memo has been blocked. So explain to us kind of the state of litigation at play.
Yeah, so you're right. It may feel repetitive, but this is the biggest one yet. Okay, so when this freeze was put in place by OMB, this case was filed, and the judge put a temporary halt on that freeze pending the adjudication of the claims. Then another case was filed in the District of Rhode Island by various states' attorneys general, and that court also ordered it blocked, but it only ordered it blocked for those states. And there was, after that order was entered, there still clearly was activity going on within the federal government as if this memo was still in effect. In other words, yes, the Rhode Island court had blocked it for the 20 some odd states that have been involved, but it was clearly still the case that agencies were not dispersing funds. They were not making the loans. They were not doing the things they were supposed to do. And so in now comes the Democracy Forward case back into federal court today before a federal judge that had a few choices. Number one, she could say, you know what, you're right, government, this has already been sort of mooted because, it's all worked itself out and there's no harm. Or the federal judge could do exactly as she did and say, look, whether you are trying to play games or whether you are operating in good faith, clearly this memo is still having an impact because I am looking at the testimony and the statements of real life plaintiff organizations that are saying they're not getting their grants, they're not getting their loans, and this was never a problem. But now all of a sudden there is a freeze. So, I want to be 100% clear. The judge basically said, this memo is suspended. Agencies are to act as if it was never issued. And this applies to all federal agencies. It applies to grants and in all 50 states. So enough with the nonsense. So it is a very broad relief that this judge entered. And now we're going to see whether the games end. I kind of suspect they won't. I think that we'll now have a game of cat and mouse. But here's my message to the people working in these federal agencies, whether they're career or they're political. You've now got two federal judges who have issued blocks of this order. And this federal judge clearly means business. And she's located in your backyard. She's in Washington, D.C. So if I were you, I would turn on the spigot for those grants and loans that were authorized by Congress and stop playing games. Otherwise, you may find yourself on the losing end of a contempt citation. And by the way, Donald Trump may have immunity, but no one else in the federal government does from criminal contempt, and civil contempt, no one has immunity from. So we'll see whether this ends it. Like I said, I'm not naive. I'm not saying it won't, but this gives a powerful new tool to the people who are trying to rightfully turn the spigot back on. And let me say one more word about this page. Democracy Docket has been all over this from the very first filing through this order. And, the legacy media has been on and off while it focuses on a bunch of other stuff. So please, if you're not already subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, click on the link above or in the show notes below, because that is where you're going to get the most unadulterated, honest coverage of this. It is fiercely independent, unabashedly pro-democracy. So sign up now.
Marc, and in the middle of all this litigation, you had an interesting development from the White House itself. So last Monday, the OMB issues this memo. Litigation's filed. This first temporary block goes into effect, blocks the memo. The next day, the OMB rescinds the memo and takes it away, acts like it never happened. Shortly thereafter, you have White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt post on Twitter saying that the memo may be rescinded, but everything's still in effect. The president still has the power to control spending as he wishes. And that sent off a new flurry of court activity, right? The judge in Rhode Island said, "You're telling me this memo is rescinded." I have a tweet from the press secretary saying it's basically still in effect. You have the judge in DC today also citing this tweet from Caroline Leavitt saying the memo itself may be gone, but the intention is still there, which leads to this very specific wording from the judge saying that the defendants are enjoined from implementing, giving effect to, or reinstating under a different name the directives in OMB Memorandum M2513 with respect to the disbursement of federal funds under all open awards.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I'm glad you mentioned this, because, this is what I described as the game of cat and mouse, right? Here it is, a federal judge had blocked this memo. And what does the White House do? It sends its press secretary out, just as you described, to tweet and say, "Oh, yeah, that may have been rescinded, but it's still in effect over here." And there is no way to read this court's order other than to say, cut it out. Cut it out. And look, this judge, went out of her way to say, in pretty direct terms, that what's going on here is disingenuous. That's her word, not mine. And when you are disingenuous with a judge and you're a lawyer, you face one set of consequences. When you are working at a federal agency, you face a whole bunch more problems. And so, like I said, I don't doubt that the gamesmanship is over, but I do believe we have a committed federal judge right now who is going to see to it that it doesn't continue.
So, Marc, this order today is from the Washington, D.C. case. Now we have the second lawsuit in Rhode Island with a very interesting update happening there today. The DOJ filed a brief in the Rhode Island case, basically saying it doesn't think that the judge's order to freeze the memo has any effect, that they don't have to implement it.
Yeah. And I think this judge read that and then took that into account in this order. I mean, this judge makes clear, as you have said, that that whatever name they put to this memo, if they try to implement the policy in the memo, they're going to be in contempt of court. And this judge ordered that the government must provide written notice of the court's order to all agencies that received it, right? So part of what the Department of Justice did in the Rhode Island case said, well, we assume we only have to send it to places that were sued. And here they're saying, no, this judge is saying, nope, it goes to everybody who got your OMB memo, which is basically the entire federal government. That the written notice shall instruct the agencies that they may not take any steps to implement, give effect to, or reinstate under a different name the directives in that OMB memo, and that the agencies are to release disbursements on open awards that were paused during the memo. Finally, it tells them that they have to file a status report on or before February 7th, showing that they've complied with it. And this is the court's way of saying, all right, you got to send this out, and I expect you back in my courtroom in a week, less than a week, to explain that you've done what I've ordered you to do. And boy, I don't want to be a lawyer for the government who has to show up and explain, if the other side says that there were violations, why the hell there were violations. And so this is really good news. I cannot state enough the tremendous work that Democracy Forward did, in pursuing this like a dog with a bone. Paige, you may or may not know this. I helped create and found Democracy Forward. I am the chair of their board, and I'm very proud of them today. So good work, everybody. Let's take a moment to celebrate. This is not the only case going on, unfortunately. And Paige, we're going to be following a lot of them at Democracy Docket.
Right, Mark. And we follow all of these cases because the impact of these laws and decisions by the Trump administration are real. As the judge noted in her order today, the potential scope of the freeze is as great as $3 trillion, and its effects are difficult to fully grasp. Plaintiffs point to news reports detailing far-reaching effects. Preschools could not pay their staff. Los Angeles and North Carolina were denied disaster relief aid, and elderly Americans who relied on subsidized programs for food did not know if their next meal would come. The importance of lawyers showing up in court to fight these memos, executive actions, orders issued by the Trump administration are not just to help our big picture democracy, but really make sure that the everyday lives of Americans are not interrupted by these anti-democratic forces.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad you mentioned that because, it's too easy sometimes to look at what Donald Trump is doing around the federal government and say, this is him seizing power. And it is. It's easy to say that this is him empowering oligarchs. And it is. But at the other end of this, the people who will lose when that happens are the people who don't get the payments they deserve, the communities that are not getting the money they deserve, the people whose citizenship is being threatened by his unconstitutional birthright citizenship order. I can go on and on down the line. And believe me, Paige and I, we read your emails, we read your comments, we know how worried you are. And we take that seriously. It is one of the jobs of Democracy Docket to cover what's happening to democracy in courts because of the fear that this has engendered, because of the concern that this has created, because of the real world consequences it has created for everyday Americans, including so many of you who are watching. So keep sending us your comments, keep sending us your emails, and please make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket. There is a free option. It is again in the show notes below and a link above, and we will see you next time.